right. We're live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, X, Instagram. Mute is off, camera's on. Got that going and that going. I'm all set. I think I'm all set. Let's get rid of Ion and his theme song Forest. Comments are on. I think we're good to go on a July Monday, late July Monday afternoon. I hope everybody is well. I don't know if anybody's going to join us here in the middle of summer, but we will do the best we can. I know that my office is on holiday today, the person responsible for this show, so I won't even have comments coming in from her, but we're just going to push through it. I'm out west in the home podcast studio. I know it's a little disjointed right now. I have it set up for guests coming in here to do a podcast, so it's not the usual background for you. But out east, are you having a hot and smoky summer? We're just wasting some time here, by the way, while people join us on the live stream. There's lots of fires around here. A couple of towns over. There's in Kimberley, British Columbia. There was an evacuation order last week, I believe. Helicopters flying over our house nonstop, carrying water buckets. It's been quite the thing, and my social media feed has been inundated with U.S. posters, including those from the federal government out of Washington, blaming us Canadians for all the smoke in the east and the negative health benefits that go along with that. And I think what those in Washington don't realize is that forest fires very often happen where the trees are. I don't know that they know that. And in the eastern U.S., there's not a lot of trees, whereas there is in Canada. But in the western U.S., where there are trees, Idaho, what other states are down there? Idaho, Montana, Oregon, Washington, Upper California, all on fire. And where I am, we have to breathe this every single year. It's a problem in both countries. Both countries are terrible at forest management. These forest fires are completely controllable with some investment and prioritizing of resources, but neither country does that. It's a disaster. It's one of my pet peeves, which is the same as our turnaround business. Most problems are fixable with some priorities, but that is not what's going on when it comes to forest management. Okay, we have our comments on. We've given people a chance to join us here in a hot summer day. Welcome to the Winning Momentum podcast, where we do a week in review at Sinclair Range, and we've been a couple of weeks here working on closing deals, so we haven't been putting out a show the last couple of weeks. So we've got a few things to catch up on with you. My name is Scott Sinclair. I'm founder, owner, and president of Sinclair Range. And this is your look into the real world of the insights of what's going on at Sinclair Range, daily deals or weekly deals, decisions, day-to-day business. And we cover it usually in segments, not always, but interesting file or deal of the week, lessons learn for the week, struggles of the week, Scott's observations of the week. And don't forget, this week in review show started as a rebuild of Sinclair Range when I was coming out of an illness and everything went to crap. And it's sharing some of the journey on the turnaround of Sinclair Range itself, which has been going pretty well, but we still have places to go. So last week we closed a deal. Yay! Got to celebrate those wins. I really like this deal. It's a great solution for the client. It's a small deal, but it's a great solution for the client. And it is a clean example of what we do very, very, very well at Sinclair Range. And what we do at Sinclair Range is we provide advisory services for businesses in transition. That could be a business going through a high growth spurt. How do we get from here to there with high growth and the advice and capital required to do that? Or through distress, which if you really think about it, the turnaround of a distressed business is in fact high growth. It's bringing order to chaos. Maybe the business used to be up here. If you're on the audio podcast, you're not at all seeing my hands, but up here. And then, it declined 20%, 30%, whatever. And now you're going to rebound. That's the turnaround. And so it's very, very similar from our perspective. In fact, the exact same engagement letter the exact same engagement letter, word for word, as high growth. So we provide advisory services to businesses in transition, and we provide capital to businesses in transition, which we have done through lending. From time to time, we acquire companies for our own account. So we have a portfolio of businesses. Not right now. We've exited, well, not everything, but we've exited most. But on the lending side, and sometimes we combine these things. So we provide advisory and capital lending services to the business in transition. Not always, not necessary, but we can combine those with, I think, makes us really, really unique. So I don't know, 9 months ago or so, we had a client come to us I'm just going to say, in an industry that was very troubled, very distressed. Their revenue took an 80% hit when the tariffs came because they were doing a lot of cross-border work, and it was in an industry that got hammered, and their loans got called by the bank, so they head into special loans, and this company hired Sinclair Range, and I became their chief restructuring officer. Sinclair Range was doing their cash flow work for the bank. They bought our virtual fractional controllership service, so we started doing their books and records. Bottom line is we know everything about this business, and we negotiated in the first instance a forbearance agreement with the bank. Now, to remind you on the show, what is a forbearance agreement? A forbearance agreement, let me just check my comments over here. A forbearance agreement is a private contract between a borrower and a lender. And what it does very often is the borrower says, okay, I agree that I owe you all this money, lender, and that their security as follows. And I don't dispute any of that. And I'm not going to give you a hard time if you have to go collect it. But here's what you're going to do for me, lender. You're going to give me more time, sometimes more money, to go and do the following things, to try to find another lender, to sell the business or whatever. And so we negotiated this forbearance agreement. And then we did what's called the sales investment solicitation process. If you're a longtime listener to this show, you will know. I hope my audio's good. I don't really have any tests. Yeah, we're good. We don't have, if you're a longtime listener to the show, you know what a sales investment solicitation process is. It's a sales process where you go to market, and you can do it court supervised, you can do it not court supervised, which we often do. But basically, you run the same process where you're out trying to find buyers and you're trying to find investment for the company. And the importance in this situation where you have a bank that has put you into special loans and the borrower into special loans, and the borrower needs to get out, but it's difficult to pay the bank 100 cents on the dollar. Well, you can't just go to the bank, as many borrowers do, many clients of ours do before they hire us, and say, well, we want to pay you 50 cents on the dollar or 70 cents on the dollar. The banker can't really do that. And they can't do that because they have no idea what the business is worth, what the assets are worth, how much would they recover if they put in a receiver and try to liquidate the assets. They need what we call price discovery. And a price discovery, one way to do that would be to hire appraisers to go in and appraise the assets, and liquidators to give you sort of a bottom line bid. But the other way is to go to market and try to sell this thing through a credible intermediary such as Sinclair Range. And so that's what we do on this company. And for the borrower, it's kind of, in a weird way, a win-win, because either you're going to get enough money to pay out the bank and get out of the problem, or you're going to go through this price discovery exercise where the banker can come along for the journey, for the ride, and at the end understand that their debt maybe isn't worth 100 cents on the dollar, maybe it's worth 70 cents on the dollar, and that's what the market has told them. And now that special loans manager officer can go to their credit people to up their chain of command and say, hey, all this work has been done, and we're not going to collect 100 cents on the dollar. The right number is 70, and that's what we ought to be taking. And then you can cut a deal with the bank. So we went through all this process with this client, and then I've told you on this show many times before, we've announced it about Sapphire Global Finance, which is a high yield private lender through a single family office in Western Canada. and we are their exclusive financial advisor. We were able to introduce these two parties and intermediate this. And bottom line is, last week, Sapphire was able to purchase the debt from the bank at a discount, and this company now has a new banker in Sapphire that is friendly and somewhat related to Sinclair Range and is interested in the growth and the rebound of this business, which, by the way, this deal closed right at the time when the order book of this business is just exploding. It's exploding because the industry is turning around. We're in the right place and we're in the right time, and it is all very exciting. So the timing couldn't be any better. And now the mission now moving forward, because Sinclair Range remains an advisor to this company and to its lender at this point. But the mission now is to create real shareholder value for the shareholders of this business. I'm very excited about this next stage. We've got to execute on this backlog of orders and push forward. So there's an exciting deal to announce. Speaking of private lending, Interim Credit Corp, do you remember I've talked to you about this? We have a new business that we own a part of in combination with Mark Wilk and Wilk Capital Group, who, by the way, I invited to join us on this live stream, but he didn't get back to me. I'm not sure what Mark is doing today. Hey, Juice844, thank you for joining us on Instagram. Oops, I do not want to leave the site. Bear with me over here. So we announced the formation of Interim Credit, and what Interim Credit is doing is, again, providing high-yield secured debt largely to the Canadian marketplace, mid-market and smaller ABL-style first secured deals. Interim Credit, if you go and look up the announcements, has been, we have dedicated funding, which is unusual and hard to pull off. We've worked on it. I worked on that for about 6 months in 2026. And so it's come together, and it's only a few weeks old, and the deals are already coming in. We've been talking to probably hundreds of parties already, which has been cool. We had a deal last week or 2 weeks ago that we could have done, but we had to back away because we found there was a conflict there. But that was an interesting deal that came to Interim Credit. And then last week, we issued our first term sheet in draft. It's a draft term sheet is being considered. We may get the deal, we may not get the deal, but it's very exciting to get this term sheet out the door. And it's a reminder of a couple of things, one being the thesis behind Interim Credit Corp, which is that in Canada, not so much in the US, but in Canada, there is a $1 billion to $1.5 billion hole in the high yield private credit marketplace for Canadian mid-market and smaller businesses looking for that financing that the bank isn't going to do for you. And you can just look at the private credit lenders that have disappeared as they've gone through difficult times raising capital. I've talked to you endlessly about why that is, so I won't go over it again. But there's this hole in the marketplace, and it's that hole that Interim Credit is starting to fill. And it reminds me of that, but it also reminds me that this particular deal and term sheet reminds me that one of the tricks to this business, one of the pitches that we made, me in particular, to our funding sources where we got the dedicated capital, is that when you're on the buy side, when you're trying to lend into this distressed high yield space, you have to create the product. You have to see the opportunity, and from that, you have to create the product. What does that mean? Well, it means that rarely does a borrower come to you looking for high yield, first secured debt. They're looking for something else. Really, often, they don't even know, even if they have a good intermediary. I mean, some of the intermediaries are fantastic, so they understand the product and it's done properly. But most of the time, even with an intermediary, the borrower doesn't understand the deal that they're sending to. So for example, and I shouldn't say understand, but they have something else in mind if you're thinking with your buy-side lending hat on. And so this deal in particular that we've issued a term sheet on came from, sorry, I got pop-ups going here, came to us as an equity deal. they need some equity money. And we were able to have a conversation with that prospective borrower and show them the merits and convince them the merits of a non-dilutive solution. In other words, we're going to lend them money, and yes, it's high yield, there's a big interest rate, but there's no equity being issued, which is, probably double to triple the rates of the debt. And so we were able to structure that deal, and now we have a term sheet in front of them, and knock on wood, if I can find some, we'll have something to work on there and maybe get our first deal done at Interim Credit in just a short period of time. We discussed this idea before on the show about manufacturing the product with Sapphire Global, the other private credit fund that has done DIP deals and just closed this other deal that we talked about earlier, in the sense that these transactions don't come to you prepackaged. You can't go out as a business development person on the buy side and find these deals. You cannot do that because they haven't been thought of yet. You need to go out and find the problem. You have to find the company that has a capital problem, and then you need to manufacture the solution. That is the trick, in my view, to this high yield lending and distress investing in general, and it's what we excel here at Sinclair Range. Let's talk about the struggles for the last week or two, since we missed a couple of shows. And this was a hard one for a client, and it's a warning to any business owners. We have a client, a company that has fallen significantly behind, let's say, with its deemed trust withholding payments to Canada Revenue Agency, CRA. What is a deemed trust? There's certain things that you can owe to CRA. You could owe income taxes, right? You make a profit for the year, you have to pay some income tax on that. That's not a deemed trust. It's serious to not pay that, but it's not as serious as if you don't pay your withholding taxes, the payroll taxes, for example, or the HST, GST, so the sales tax that may go along with the revenue that you've generated, and they're called deemed trusts, which means like it's not even you made the money and you earned it, now you owe some tax. It's like you were collecting on behalf of the government. And in Canada, and other jurisdictions in the U.S. as well, it's a very problematic situation to not pay those withholding taxes that you should have been paying on a regular basis. And so this company, long before we were involved, was way, way, way behind on paying CRA. And so they were doing what they felt to be the right thing based on the advice that you see from the internet and articles and talking to accountants and talking to lawyers. You need to be proactive. You need to be in front of CRA. So they're calling their collection officer like multiple times a day for probably weeks, maybe months. And there's no answer. There's never an answer. I don't know what's going on at CRA these days. I know it's a difficult job. I know there's limited resources, but it's almost impossible to get a hold of somebody. And then when you do, like they're gone the next week and somebody new joined the file. The turnover is incredible. And so anyways, they're calling CRA. Nobody is answering. And you can leave a voicemail, but nobody ever calls you back. And you can't email CRA. That doesn't really work. They don't have emails at all. And of course, what happens is they wake up one morning and their bank account has been garnished, which means that there's a direction to pay sent to the bank. And the bank doesn't send CRA any money because there is no money, because they're in, they have a line of credit. So their money's negative. But what it does do is it shuts the account down. And it always, just the way this works, I've seen this many, many times in my career, is they shut the account down coincidentally like the day of payroll or the day before payroll. And so your checks bounce, you can't make payroll, you don't have other banking arrangements, you're just screwed. Everything grinds to a halt. If deposits come in, they start paying down the line of credit, but nothing's going to CRA and you can't issue any payments. It's a disaster. So what happens? Panic, obviously. And so we finally get a hold of the collection officer on the phone. Now I get invited into this call. And I had said, thankfully, to the client, I said, this is what happens with CRA. And it's really, really important to not just rely on the verbal, like the telephone record. I called this guy this day. It was a guy in this case, and left a message. I didn't hear back. What you need to do is document your case, document what you're doing to try and fix the problem, document that you've been trying to make phone calls, and you need to upload, you can do it in writing, you need to upload it to My CRA, which is, if you're outside Canada, is a portal to exchange documents with the revenue agency. And I find it really important because I think, in my experience, you can have a discussion with a CRA person and then you hang up and there's totally different understandings as to what was just discussed. And I'm not trying to say that in an accusatory way, although I feel accusatory on that. But regardless, you just have a different opinion of what was said and what was agreed to. And it's really, really good to put things in writing, but you can't email them. You used to be able to fax them, but now the fax goes to a general number and they may or may not get the fax. And so upload everything to My CRA, which he did. And so now we get on the phone with the CRA collections officer, and he's like, you never tried to call me. And then, we pointed him to My CRA, where we uploaded the documentary record, according to us, of all these phone calls and everything we're trying to do. And he says, well, whatever, like I was told by my supervisor to garnish his account. And then I got him to admit that the purpose, his supervisor said, garnish the account so we can shut down this business. I've never heard CRA say that before. It's just shocking to me as I'm repeating it to you right now. The goal was to close the business, according to the collection person. I don't think that's legal. It's certainly against policy, I believe. Anyways, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not doing anything about it. I'm not complaining about it, but that's what they said. But because we uploaded this this letter to My CRA, he went back to his supervisor and we were able to get the garnishment lifted right away. We made payroll. And of course, part of that is we had to put a plan forward. Now, why would they want to shut down the business? Here's the important lesson for business owners. One of the important lessons is because when you're dealing with anybody who's a bad debt, with a creditor, and in particular CRA, it's important to think about current problems. In other words, not making the situation worse, and then fixing what was done in the past. You can't go backwards, right? So you can't, but you can start by stopping the bleeding, by not making it worse, which in terms of CRA means paying your current withholding taxes. If you're a collections person at CRA, it is your job to make the situation better, to start collecting some money, not to allow it to get worse. And if you have zero hope from his perspective, CRA's perspective, that this taxpayer is going to even pay their current deemed trusts, and so every month this is just going to become a bigger and bigger problem, I can kind of see the temptation to want to shut this thing down. And so anyways, we were able to put a plan forward. We uploaded it to My CRA. It's under consideration right now. We got the accounts open. We are we made payroll, if I didn't say that already, and we'll see how this proceeds from here. But that's just a struggle that we had. A difficult situation, obviously, for the people that own this business, for the employees, the fear that goes into that for everybody. And so just remember, upload some documents, deal with your current stuff, and the rest of this is just a negotiation. Musings for the week, as where are we? 24, 26 minutes. We can start to wrap this up. We talked about deals basically the whole show, and negotiation. And I'm reminded that the details are the deal. When I was a kid in my dad's office, he used to have a sign up and it said, don't sweat the small stuff. Don't sweat the details. So no, it was don't sweat the small stuff. And I took that to heart as a kid. And it's frankly the worst business advice you can ever possibly imagine. But the truth about me is I've never been all that strong on the details. I'm more big picture, transactional, strategic, but the details have never been my strength. And whenever I've gotten in trouble, or screwed things up, which we all do in our career. It's been through a lack of focus on the details. Hey, Carolee, thank you for joining us on Instagram. And so I remember I was having a meeting with a client, and we were in front of a big deal, like billions of dollars, private equity fund. And the guy was telling my client, hey, we're going to do your deal. And he's pointing at me, and he's kind of in a raised voice saying, I'm going to do your deal because this guy will never screw me, he said. So he's a little loose on details, but he'll never screw me. And so I thought to myself, oh, wow, am I a little loose on details? Well, I think I am. I think I have been. I think, we all have our strengths and we all have our weaknesses. It's important in life. It's important to business to know who you are. And I excel at many, many, many things. But the details and the paperwork and the dotting the I's and the crossing the T's are not necessarily one of them. And, you see this with other professionals as well. 2 weeks ago, we were reviewing a significant financing opportunity in North America, and people, really, really good people, lawyers, intermediaries, investment bankers, they all been working on this thing for like 6 months. And when I looked at it, it took me about a day to figure out that the assets they're trying to finance aren't really owned cleanly, at least, or can't really be explained how the borrower actually even owns these assets. And all these people miss this entirely. And it's in the detail of contracts, this thick. And so there's an example of not being focused on the details that just kills the deals. And last week, in a different situation, we were working on a deal and we reviewed a bunch of disclosures from counsel. And when they set up the company to do this transaction, like a SPV, a special purpose vehicle, the share certificate was actually issued to the principal in their personal capacity rather than through the structure that had been created, the holding company for this, which is a bit of a nightmare because it creates tax problems that shouldn't exist. It creates other, I don't know how I want to say this without disclosing too much, so I will not, but it creates problems from the flow of cash and just capturing within the structure that was created. It creates some serious issues. And so both of these problems I found because I just work on AI now every single day as a part, like for hours and hours every day. As a partner to me, so that I can do what I do really well, which is the transactions, the strategy, the execution, the management of things. But I use AI it has full access to CRM, emails for years. I have it sweep my entire inbox and server, all client, all stuff, just sweeps our server. And what it does is it's able to take this huge data set of information and come up with details and to-do lists and tasks and housekeeping, things that need to be done. And it's fantastic. And I'm telling you, it's cured me of that weakness that I have professionally. And because I had the weakness professionally, I would say the firm had the weakness professionally. And now people are bringing their detailed stuff for us. It's working so well to provide them as a service. It's really quite interesting. And so AI is it's a game changer. You already know that. The leverage is real. And it allows us to provide a much better service. And all I have to do is care. All I have to do to care is care that the details are getting done, which I do care. I do care. We're going to court this Friday on a payout on a significant deal. Hopefully I can announce that to you next week. And the court materials that I was reviewing last week in the middle of everything it's got to be thousands and thousands of pages. Do you think in a short period of time to prepare my affidavit, to respond to everything, to support our motion on the payout, that I'm going to be able to read every last word of that, understand every last detail? Not a chance in hell. Not a chance in hell. But with AI, that's what we are able to do. And as a result, we are kicking ass here at Sinclair Range. Let's wrap that up. We're 30 minutes into it as we planned. Thanks for listening. Reach out in the notes, call us, email us, go to sinclairrange.com. If you're a company going through a transition, we exist to help. If you are you need capital in any shape or form, reach out to me, and we now have products that we can bring to you to help on the capital front. You don't have to be a client for that. Intermediaries should reach out as well. We are very selective of when we combine the advisory and the capital. So reach out to us. Let's have a conversation. If you're navigating high growth, if you're navigating financial distress, if you're doing deals, we are here for you. And with that, we will talk to you next week.